Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the 10 greatest conductors ever who don't belong on the lists of generalists or specialists. Well, this is sort of a tricky topic, as I'm sure you'll agree. These are conductors who are difficult to pigeonhole or who didn't fit the parameters of this exercise, but they were unquestionably great conductors. Some of them amazingly great conductors. It's just that, well, we'll get to them one at a time. Let's take it as it comes and see where we start. And don't argue with me about what does or doesn't belong on the list, like this one belonged on that list. You can add conductors if you want, who you think are great, but we're not going to get into a debate over which list they go on. We had the 20 greatest conductors ever as a corrective to the stupid BBC list of 20 greatest conductors, which was ridiculous, and as an adjunct to conductor Kenneth Wood's list of 20 greatest conductors, which I thought was kind of quixotic. Actually interesting, very interesting, because he actually gives us his reasoning, but I also had some disagreements with. So I gave you the correct lists. Let's face it, they're the best ones out there. My lists are the best damn lists on the internet. I guarantee it. But now we're going to talk about the conductors who don't belong on the list of either generalists or specialists, because they don't fall into either category for this exercise. We begin with Thomas Beecham. Now, there's an unclassifiable guy, if ever there was one, isn't there? First of all, most of his best work was done in mono, and we sort of drew the line at stereo. But for these other exercises, I'm going to, open up the field as long as the conductor's dead, with the exception of Leonard Slatkin. A lot of you keep mentioning living people. I mean, the whole point of this is dead folks. Except for Leonard Slatkin, because he's the last great living generalist, in my view, or one of them. I mean, certainly the most prominent and the best of them. So he deserves to be on any list, and while he's still around, to enjoy it if he cares. But no, they all got to be dead. And these guys, as far as I can tell, are all dead. Thoroughly, completely, utterly dead. So Thomas Beecham we started with. He was great with Delius. He was amazing with Haydn. He was fabulous in French music. He had his lollipops and bonbons. He had lovely Sibelius. He had these, he was a terrific opera conductor. He had these specialties, but his stereo discography is quite limited. We desperately need a beautiful Thomas Beecham box, I keep saying, both from Columbia, both from Sony and from Warner. It'll probably never happen, but we need it. The operas are in the boxes, dedicated to the singers like Victoria de Los Angeles and whatnot. You get Carmen and the other stuff that they did, but still, his repertoire selection was incredibly quixotic, but at what he did, he was amazing. So, but when he competed with others, as in, for example, Scheherazade or Ein Heldenleben or the Symphonie Fantastique, it didn't always come out so well. Kind of interesting there. So Beecham definitely is one of the greatest conductors ever. I mean, he founded orchestras in the UK, essentially. I mean, modern symphony orchestras in the UK would not exist had it not been for Beecham, spending his personal wealth on 2 or 3 of them. So, give the man credit. He deserves it. Next, Nikolaus Harnoncourt. Well, there's a period instrument guy who's nice and dead. So I can mention him. Harnoncourt was a genius, and he was really a generalist in a way. He was like Leopold Stokowski, only with scholarly trimmings. But the results were the same. He basically did whatever he damn well pleased, and and sometimes it came out wonderfully, and sometimes it was just weird. But wow, did he have a huge discography, and he interested us and introduced us to zillions of Baroque things we never would have listened to, and he made us hear some of the ones we do listen to in a completely weird and different way. And sometimes it was enthralling, and sometimes it was infuriating. He always occasioned comment. And later in his career, when he started conducting regular orchestras and doing the late Romantic repertoire, he proved himself pretty adept at Dvorak, particularly beautiful Dvorak. His Brahms was in the strange category, but and some contemporary things too. I mean, he did Porgy and Bess horribly, but he did it. Give him credit. Really kind of a fascinating guy, don't you think? And unquestionably one of the great conductors of the second half of the 20th century. There was nobody like him. I mean, he was uncategorizable. So after Harnoncourt, okay, Rudolf Kempe. Now there's somebody people don't talk about at all. I mean, we talk about him because he did this thing. There's this amazing ring here. Where is it? He was a tremendous Wagnerian. There it is. I like to haul this out, except this is childbirth. So never mind. The Kempe ring I have, where's the Kempe? I don't know, I've got it somewhere. That was childbirth. Kempe's ring is, some people consider even better than childbirth. So there you go. It's on Orfeo. I'm sorry. It's in the Orfeo Wagner stuff downstairs. But he was amazing. There was the Kempe Lohengrin. Let's talk about Lohengrin. That one I know I've got, and somewhere up here, and it was amazing. But the thing about Kempe is that he was one of the chord guys. And, chord guys are kind of rare in the German universe because German music is all about Bach and counterpoint and all that crap. So Kempe was a colorist, an amazing orchestral colorist. I mean, his Richard Strauss was incomparable, phenomenal, amazing. And he was as comfortable doing Brahms, which turned out to be much better than you would think it did, but it was. I mean, we just listened to some of it, and it was really good. His Brahms was terrific, but so was his Dvorak. His Scheherazade was amazing. He did Janáček's Glagolitic Mass for Decca. He had a wonderful range of repertoire. His Respighi tone poems. I mean, he was really one of the few German conductors who could get into all of that coloristic stuff and do amazing things with it. But because he was a German conductor, he didn't have the opportunity to do as much of it as he could have, and probably should have, because I think he would have had a lot to say, a lot of wonderful textural French music, 20th century music that he wasn't granted the opportunity to record. But he did at least get to do a lot of Richard Strauss, and he was a phenomenal orchestral magician who deserves tons and tons and tons of credit, even though his discography is a little bit limited. And we know what he could have done, and that's how he gets on the list. Next, well, you may have heard of this guy, Arturo Toscanini. Yes, you see, he was all in the mono era. But let's face it, I mean, he was the most important conductor of the entire 20th century, period. He was great at everything he touched, unquestionably, except perhaps music from the classical period, which he didn't have much an affinity for. He admitted that, but he did it anyway, with bizarrely quick tempos and things. But he was extraordinary. His recordings have held up very, very well. Despite the dry sonics, he was an amazing opera conductor. He was a friend of Verdi. He was hung out with Puccini. He conducted premieres of their music. He really, and the fact that he lived as long as he did, and was able to make recordings mostly in the 40s and 50s, before he died, of an enormous range of repertoire, is a miracle. It really is, because he was born in the 1860s, let's not forget. So he is a living avatar of correct performance practice. And of course, we have him verbally, testimony, talking about how orchestras should make correct vibrato, and what he demanded of his orchestras, which tells us that all of the crap that the period instrument people are purveying about that is wrong, because he was just 2 generations later than the death of Beethoven, for heaven's sake. Not even. And here he is in the 1940s and 50s making recordings that tell us exactly what authentic performance practice ought to be. So yes, Toscanini has to be on any list at some point or another. I mean, you got to put him on a list. So there you go. Next, Pierre Boulez. I think Boulez was a remarkable musician. I really do. I mean, I got a lot of guff from you folks because I dismissed his compositions, much of which I think is just garbage. But as a musician, I mean, let's face it. I mean, he was more of a German musician than a French musician, and by that I mean he was hung up on his own ideology, and that kind of stalled him as a composer. I think it certainly did. But as a conductor, Yes, he specialized in doing strange contemporary music that nobody wants to listen to, but his recordings of the Second Viennese School are legion and are splendid, especially after he learned how to conduct, which took a little while. But once he did, he had an amazing ear. They didn't call him the French Correction for nothing. I mean, the big Boulez box on Sony has some amazing things. Absolutely fabulous. And the DG box also does. I mean, his Bruckner Eighth was wonderful. His Debussy and Ravel were glorious at all periods. And, I mean, Martinon was a great Debussy and Ravel guy too, but so was Boulez. You got to give them both props for what they did well. He was wonderful in that French repertoire, especially that impressionistic, coloristic stuff, because Boulez was not a line guy either. He was a chord guy, more or less, most of the time. He could rouse himself. His Mahler had its hits and misses. It was kind of more interesting than persuasive. But he had the courage of his convictions. And, sometimes when he eviscerated something, as in, Mahler's Seventh Symphony, the results could be like weirdly interesting. They really were. So he was provocative, and he was gifted, and he got orchestras to do what he wanted them to do. And a lot of times over a wide-ranging discography. So he's got to be on the list, I think. But he wasn't a generalist, and he wasn't a specialist either, frankly. Because even in the specialist realm, if you want to say, well, okay, modern music is a specialist thing, but that doesn't mean anything to me because there's too wide a variety of things within the category of modern music. So Boulez, I think, defies categorization. Also, someone who is a little bit hard to pigeonhole, Pierre Monteux. Now, Pierre Monteux was, everybody would agree, a wonderful conductor. Also, a lot of his legacy was the mono era, but he was a guy who was at the premiere of the Franck Symphony in D minor, and he lived to make the reference recording of it. He conducted the premieres of The Rite of Spring and Daphnis and Chloe and Petrushka, and, an incredible figure in the cultural history of the 20th century. Not all of his recordings have held up fabulously well, but a surprising number of them have. His stereo legacy is limited. The Decca recordings have their hits and misses. Some of his Beethoven is excellent. Some of it is considerably less so. But he was a figure, a major figure, and a wonderful conductor, absolutely wonderful conductor. He was a generalist. I mean, in overall, but because so much of his stuff is older, and his later stuff is hit and miss. I find it hard to make him one of the greatest in either one of those categories, but a great musician and a great conductor without question. And another conductor who a lot of you mentioned, Seiji Ozawa, for sure. A tremendously wonderful, gifted conductor who in his later career actually sort of made up some of the difference that it might have cost him initially. His later Beethoven and Brahms and whatnot, Saito Keenan orchestra is very, very good. He never had a reputation in that particular corner of the repertoire. He was much more a French, sort of pan-European guy, and he was a modern music guy. And of course, Japanese music, Takemitsu, and that kind of thing, and all of it he did with great suppleness, with a fabulous orchestra. He did amazing stuff on RCA, did amazing Rite of Spring. He did great pictures in an exhibition. He was very good at things like Scheherazade, these colorful works. He did excellent Richard Strauss. His Mahler turned out to be actually very, very persuasive. He waited a long time to do it, which was smart. And so there's a lot there. He did excellent Berlioz. He did terrific French music generally. And there goes Mildred. Okay. So he deserves to be on the list for sure. But he wasn't sort of general enough, I think, to be a generalist. And he was bigger than a specialist. He sort of falls in the cracks, in my view. And his career was bifurcated by the fact that there was this big chunk, a big clump in Boston. And then he went back to Japan. And after that, he wasn't promoted in the West the way he deserved to be. And that's the record label's fault, frankly, because I think if we had a more complete picture of his entire output, then we would be able to perhaps even categorize him with the Generalists. But as it is, he was a great conductor, unquestionably a great conductor. Another great conductor who defied categorization was Carlo Maria Giulini. I mean, my goodness, he had a very limited repertoire that he recorded over and over and over. And it encompassed everything. I mean, he did Beethoven, he did Brahms, he did all the French stuff, he did all the Italian stuff, he conducted wonderful operas, but very selectively. And because he was so selective, he was a law unto himself. He was beloved by everybody. Everyone felt that there was a spiritual or transcendent power coming from the man, that his interpretations, even in his old age when they got very, very slow and sort of heavy-handed, they had a sincerity that was unquestionable, and he made some of the most beautiful recordings of anything out there. So he certainly belongs on a list, but he doesn't fit on lists of generalists or specialists. Another one I think who's somewhat similar is Colin Davis. Colin Davis wasn't as picky as Giulini was, and he was famous for doing, Berlioz and Tippett. So, and also Mozart. I give him, and maybe Beethoven too. Like I said, the trouble with Colin Davis is that he was just hit and miss. He really was. I mean, he made stunning recordings of things. He did the late Haydn symphonies with the Concertgebouw, beautiful series of recordings there. He did some, like I said, great Tippett, if anyone cares. I do. I love Tippett, but that's me. His Berlioz is iconic and incredibly important, but he re-recorded everything, like with the LSO, and didn't do it as well. His Sibelius was amazing the first time around, but he did 3 Sibelius cycles, none of which were as good as his first one. And this was audibly the case. I used to watch him when he came to New York, and, I used to say I'd never seen a Colin Davis performance that didn't have at least one major snafu in it. He would get so lost in the music. And he did. I mean, he did. You could tell that he was just completely enveloped in what he was doing, and he stopped paying attention sometimes to what was actually happening. But there was a sincerity and a musicality to everything that he did that was really special. And he was on lots of labels. He was on Philips, and he was on Warner, and he was on RCA, and his Bavarian radio stuff was really hit and miss. So he doesn't really belong on. He was a generalist, but he wasn't that good as a generalist, quite frankly. He was better at the things he specialized in, the Mozart, the Berlioz, things like that. So he did a lot, but he doesn't really fall into either category. And last but not least, a conductor many of you mentioned, and who certainly has to be on any list of the great, great, greats, Karel Ancerl. I mean, Ancerl was amazing. Amazing. He was mostly as a contemporary music conductor. I mean, his Shostakovich was incredible. His Stravinsky was incredible. His Prokofiev was incredible. His modern Czech people that you've never heard of, like Osterchol and people like that. Really, really incredible. He had an unbelievable sense of rhythm and an incredible ear for texture. And he had the Czech Philharmonic playing at what was arguably the zenith of its storied career under Ancerl, and he made nearly 100 discs for Superphone. So he's well documented, and it's great stuff. It's absolutely great stuff. So he must also go on any list. He was neither a generalist nor a specialist. His discography is a little bit limited for obvious generalist category, because he just lived in communist Czechoslovakia. He was only allowed to do so much. And I wouldn't want to call him a specialist either, because I wouldn't want to limit him, because he was so good at just about everything he did. But compared to the other generalists, he's a little bit limited. And you'll say, well, you put Silvestri on the list of generalists. Well, I did, yes. He was a special case. There are exceptions to every rule, and the important thing is that Ancerl is on the list, so we don't have to worry about which list. It's the list. So there you have it, my friends. So far, we have 30 of the 20 greatest conductors ever. Because any of these people could be on that list, I think. I mean, they really could. And it's what a fabulous group. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.